Good evening, or good morning, good noon, or good midnight, whenever and wherever you're watching this. Welcome to the Sunday Poem. Today it's a poem by a Nobel Prize-winning author and a driving force behind the Irish literary revival, William Butler Yeats. And this poem sent me into a spiral of thoughts and memories and emotions, and so please forgive me when this video is a bit more personal and a bit longer than my usual Sunday poem videos, because this poem reminded me of my dad and a conversation that I had with him. In his 20s, my dad was not only an incredibly talented amateur artist, an illustrator and photographer. As an amateur wrestler, he was also a successful sportsman, and he had quite an extensive library of books, so you can imagine where my various interests come from, other than the sports thing, right? My dad has always been my hero, and he always supported me in all my various interests and ambitions, not only in my own pursuits in photography and illustration, but no matter what I did, and no matter whether he personally thought that anything I did was the right thing to do with my life, he was there, always, unconditionally. And even though I don't like the word amateur, specifically not when it comes to art, I nevertheless put an emphasis on this word when I described my dad's ambitions, simply because as a profession, my dad used to work as a company technician for most parts of his working life to provide for his family. More than anything, my dad was, and still is, a family man. He loves his family. He loved and still loves his late parents and late grandparents. He loves his brother and sister, and of course, above all, he loved and loves his late wife, my late mother. And of course, he loves his children, right? My two sisters, my brother and me, and all the grandchildren he has. Over the course of his life, he pushed everything aside that stood in the way of providing for his family, and I mean, of course, his interest in arts and sports and his interest in literature, because he simply didn't have the time for it. And whenever I asked him why he didn't at least try to make time for it, he always said, "It's not important." What does this all have to do with today's poem? My dad had to retire early for health reasons and is now, about 15 years later, care dependent because his health got worse. And because of the various work-related injuries he had to suffer, he's almost unable to do anything anymore. He now has the time, but since he can't feel his fingers anymore due to nerve damage in his hands, and he can't sit for a longer time due to multiple ruptured discs in his spine and other health issues, he can't take up drawing anymore. But he is still an enthusiastic photographer, and he takes photos of everything and everyone, and he prints the photos on his little photo printer that my brother and I gave him as a birthday present some years ago. I remember a moment when I found my dad quite bewildered after he read about, I think it was one of the Rolling Stones' multiple farewell tours, and when he said, "Why do they even do that? They don't need the money." And I didn't find the right words to explain to him that for an artist, it's not about the money. Say what you will about the Rolling Stones, no matter whether you like them or their music or you don't like them and their music, they sure don't need the money. And whether you believe that they do it for the applause or the fame, well, That's up to you. I personally don't think so, and I'm not even a particular fan of the Rolling Stones. And other artists who still work their thing, right, in their old age, I think they also prove my point. I have worked with numerous artists in my life, with tons of little-known artists and with some very few world-renowned, even Grammy and Academy Award-winning artists, and with none of them I ever had the feeling that essentially they do it for the money or the fame. In most cases, they use the money and the fame to be able to do what they need to do. So, what is it then that drives them? And here, the circle finally closes. I think there is no better text to explain, at least in my view, the hunger and the drive that makes an artist, and no matter if it's an amateur or a professional artist's heart beat, than today's poem titled What Then? By William Butler Yeats, and maybe I'll read this poem to my dad. Let me know in the comments what you think. I'll be glad to read your thoughts. His chosen comrades thought at school he must grow a famous man. He thought the same, and lived by rule, all his 20s crammed with toil. What then? Sang Plato's ghost. What then? Everything he wrote was read. After certain years he won sufficient money for his need, friends that have been friends indeed. What then? Sang Plato's ghost. What then? All his happier dreams came true. A small old house, wife, daughter, son. Grounds were plum and cabbage grew. Poets and wits about him drew. What then? Sang Plato's ghost. What then? The work is done. Grown old, he thought, according to my boyish plan. Let the fools rage, I swerved in naught, something to perfection brought. But louder sang that ghost. What then?